this 2024 budget has seen a federal lawmaker being suspended. So would you say that Senator Ningi was right to have blown the whistle at the first time? Maybe not absolute in the figures that he said, but blowing the whistle in the fact that the budget was padded and there were indiscriminate insertions. Was he right?
On those 2 points, budget being padded, indiscriminate insertions that were not equitable, he was right. If he made points about the fact that National Assembly members now use their privilege because they superintend over committees and they also maybe have some status or levels within the National Assembly, and they now put whatever they like in different agencies and now model up the entire budget final framework. He was right. And I think we made that point that he might have been wrong on some things that he made claims about, maybe he modeled his figures up. But on the fact about that, the budget has stopped being a policy instrument and it's just used to extend political opportunities and leverage. I think on that point, he was clearly right. And I never supported the suspension of Senator Ningi. I do not support the suspension of the representation of the people in the National Assembly. If the National Assembly has issues with any senator on any situation, let them take the person to court, and maybe the person did something illegal, criminal, or something like that. But for National Assembly to just say, go 9 months, go 3 months, go 90 days, I don't think that's fair.
So let's some very quick questions I'd like to ask you. So Senator Ningi is now vindicated by what budget has found out.
And I mean, to some certain level, to the part of, like I mentioned, maybe not 100% right, but on the part of the fact that, and we mentioned this immediately the budget happened. This is not a new conversation. When Senator Ningi brought out his allegation, we presented a paper, and that was when we mentioned that 7,447 projects were inserted into the budget by the National Assembly. And these projects were over 2.2 trillion naira. And we made those claims that it has never been this brazen, it has never been this huge. And also, it's not that these projects are not major projects. So I'm not saying you put in a Lagos-Ibadan Express Road here. It's more like putting street lights, boreholes, water systems, support for traditional rulers, and scattering that all over the budget. And in that way, what happens is that you don't get the most important things. You don't get to prioritize what is most important for the country at that point. You also don't send money to the places that are most important. I mean, look at what we've had in Maiduguri recently. That dam has been budgeted for over the years, but the funds have not been fully released over the years for the rehabilitation of that dam. And at the end of the day, and if you check that same agencies, that's constituency project. That is the National Assembly members are forcing it without capacity, without scope, without technical expertise to execute those projects. I mean, let's take it, break it down.
All right. Let's before we get into the nitty-gritty, we will take time to look at those items, the details, because I want you to be able to tell us with your own mouth what budget has found out. But before we get into it, let's get clarity. Constituency project are such projects that are standard in legislative practice in most democracies, where a lawmaker influence projects in his own constituency for the benefit of his people. So in that sense, constituency project is not a wrong thing. It's a rightful thing to do and legitimate, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think budget's position has always been clear. There is nothing wrong about doing constituency projects if it is done responsibly. It is fine for a senator or House of Rep member to make a decision and say, for my people also should get something. Even I feel that it should be something that should benefit more people. I mean, you build a school, you build an hospital, you build a water system. It's not, you go and start distributing sugarcane or start distributing sewing machines. But I feel that constituency project, I mean, the US, they call it pork and barrel project, are fundamental. I mean, have been shown in most democracies, most presidential democracies, let me put it that way, to happen. And I think it should be welcome. And I think Nigerians have come to accept it.
Yeah. So I'm trying to build a case here such that Nigerians will understand where we're coming from, what is right, what is wrong, and what in the eyes of the law are the infractions and the abuse of office. Because what we are able to analyze right here on the podcast is there are two major issues right here. Infractions, which are somewhat might be illegal, and abuse of office, which is a moral duty, which is taken out of context or out of the premise. Now, what is right in the eye of the law as far as the Appropriation Bill or Act of 2024 is concerned for constituency project is an envelope budget of 100 billion naira. Is that right?
That's right.
That is what we are supposed to have gotten for lawmakers. 100 billion naira, nothing more, nothing less.
Exactly. Nothing more, nothing less. It should have been 100 billion. It's under the consolidated fund, and that's where it's supposed to be. And it's not supposed, and you are supposed to nominate projects into it, based on maybe your ranking or status in the National Assembly, and that should just be it. And that was what it was for years until recently, where people left the 100. They would still nominate projects in the 100 billion. But they now went directly into the budget of the MDAs and now started indiscriminately inserting items into.
All right. Now, so what also caught our attention is the unwise, indiscriminate, because if you are wise in the way and manner you insert this project, people will think, okay, that is right. If you put round hole in round pegs, or round pegs in round hole, people will say it makes a lot of sense. But it does look like there are senseless ways by which they approached it. And there are, if you cross those projects across the MDAs, you see that they don't belong in those MDAs, which is what gets our attention. So let's get to it, Mr. Ningi. Can you summarize to us, because we understand 100 billion naira is what should go as an envelope budget for constituency project. Summarize for us what budget has found out as indiscriminate in this apportioning of funds.
Let me first start with that there's a fundamental issue here, and there are two fundamental issues here. One issue is the appropriation powers of the National Assembly, which has been left open-ended because nobody has been bold enough to seek full interpretation from the Supreme Court. And I'm a big fan that should be done, because it looks like this Supreme Court we have is not textual. It sees the Constitution as a living organism, which is the way we saw the interpretation of the LGA autonomy. I'm big because National Assembly has kept the open and appropriations power open-ended, which means we can add, we can remove, we can adjust, we can do whatever we like with the budget, something also very similar to what you get with the U.S. Congress. But whatever you get with the U.S. Congress also has a context in some sort of way, because there are earmarks and there are fixed costs within that structure. So there's little wiggle room for you. But in Nigeria, you get a budget, you set your strategy, you set your policy, then somebody comes in and put whatever they like in that budget. So the issue state is that National Assembly, they have appropriation powers as of today. The second thing is the abuse of those powers. And I think that's the major problem that we are contending with today, that because with great power comes with great responsibility. If I've been asked to superintend over a committee, it's an abuse of power to now trying to influence the direction of that agency or that my committee, and now start putting projects in the budget of that committee to serve myself and to serve my constituency in some sort of way. So for me, I think that's where these fundamentals are, that appropriation powers need to be properly defined. And even if you can't define it from a judicial perspective, it needs to be politically defined. Let's not forget that previously, the budget was always passed or signed into law around June. I mean, the Goodluck Jonathan days, the project was passed May, June. And why? Because there was contestation. There were huge debates on some certain items in the budget, and in terms of deficit management, in terms of oil benchmark price and all of those things. But right now, you see that it's become a lose-end situation, a free-for-all. And at the end of the day, we all have seen the implications of all of that within the economy. So for me, I'm big on the fact that this is an issue to discuss on the appropriation powers of the National Assembly. What is the extent of that? What is the executive doing about managing that? And thirdly, it's also to look about there are wider implications of that. But when you now decide to look into this whole issue, it's simply about somebody understanding that the 100 billion naira, and let's be honest here, the National Assembly members have come to an understanding that the 100 billion naira is never enough. It's not enough for them anymore. You understand? Because when the budget was 7 trillion, when it was 4 trillion naira, it was 100 billion. When it became 7 trillion, it was 100 billion. When it's become 28 trillion naira, it has still remained 100 billion. So maybe we have to be factual that they've looked at the size of the budget and asked themselves, this and inflation and all that, we don't think this is enough for us. But the problem is, how do you cap that? Where does that stop? Where do you draw the line? If the entire capital budget of the federal government has proposed around 8 trillion naira, why should National Assembly add another extra 2 trillion naira on items that do not change our dimensions or our situation on a large scale? So for me, that's where the bigger problem is.
So can you summarize to us what you have found out? What are the figures that you have found out?
And if you look at the figures that we have found out, basically you will see that it's been appropriations in different manner. Firstly, is to look at which ministries are most complicit.